I was born in Las Vegas on the 4th of November, 1924. They were ranchers in the country between here and Texas, down past San Juan and Indy in that area. Times were hard, and the Depression came after I got up, just started to school well, and times really became hard for a while. Then I grew up and got older. We moved into Tucumcari, and I started to school here, or I transferred to the school, and I was old enough to start working odd jobs, and like you do, mow lawns and all those things. And that's about the beginning of it. I worked at a filling station, and I washed cars filled with gas, service cars, helped the mechanics and that kind of thing. I was just a kid. I think it's about $3 a day. 5 brothers, and there were 6 total, and all 6 of us were in the military in World War II. My mom, I felt sorrier for her than anyone else, with 6 kids off to war, and she didn't know from one day to the next when she was going to get a letter that one of them had been killed. Luckily, every one of them came through. Got a few scratches, but nobody died. Went to high school here in Tucumcari, played football, ran track, didn't make too good a grade. And the latter part of my high school year, between my junior and senior year, I joined the Army Reserve and got in a program they called CMTC, which is, at that time, it was Citizens Military Training Corps. You were supposed to be 18, and me and 2 other fellows fibbed a little bit and got in when we were 17. We took our first year of training at Fort Bliss in the Horse Cavalry, and came back home, finished that, came back home, finished high school, and volunteered to go to active duty from Tucumcari here, but not with the Guard. It was, at that time, the Guard was already gone from here. And that was the beginning of my career in 1942. The first I really knew about the National Guard was in 41. I knew they started gathering the Guard in 41 and started recruiting for the Guard here in Tucumcari. And that was shortly after December the 7th. I believe I have my dates right. I think it was just after Pearl Harbor or just before. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of the National Guard. And I couldn't get in it because they were right here and they knew how old we were, so I made no attempt to join the National Guard at that time. The National Guard here was called to active duty, I believe it was in late 41 or early 42, I can't remember for sure. But I was still in high school, and they left. The Guard was mobilized and they took them to various places for training. I just couldn't wait because I liked the military. That's why I ended up in the Horse Cavalry in the first place. It always interested me, and it seemed like a good idea for a kid to have a lot of challenges. All my brothers were older than me, and all of them enlisted on their own before or shortly after Pearl Harbor, most of them. Now, when I went to active duty, just out of high school in 42, they stopped enlistments because at that time they had so many volunteers on active duty and for active duty that the only way you could get in is go down to the draft board and volunteer through the draft board. You couldn't enlist directly. Went down and joined went through selective service and volunteered for active duty. and that was in early 1943. Actually, I was a student at an oxygen generating school in Springfield, Illinois, and at that time, oxygen was made by the military for their own use, and they had a mobile plant that had compressors and ran through a chemical process and bottled huge bottles of oxygen, which eventually ended up in systems of aircraft, fighters and jet bombers both. And I ended up graduating from that and was kept over about 6 months or 7 as an instructor there. Me and my oldest brother met in Hawaii in 1944. He was stationed there, and I passed through there temporarily and was put in a new unit that later became one of the units that invaded Iwo Jima. And he was still in Hawaii when I left there for Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps went in before we did, naturally. And we sat on board ship for 4 days or 5 when the Marines took the south end of the island and Mount Suribachi. And the airfield was just up from it. And once they cleared the Suribachi, we were able to get in and get on there right behind the Marines, in fact almost with them. And we helped the Marine Corps carry dead people and people out of the hospital to bury them there because they were so short-handed and getting so many people wounded. They took a terrible beating. And but don't be confused by what I tell you about the invasion. The United States Marine Corps was the guys that did the invasion. And they died by the hundreds. We got in on seeing that. We helped them every way we could help them until we had to go to work to get the airfield and our stuff into shape and get onto the airfield and then start establishing the first airfield and getting it in shape and getting our equipment out and getting ready to do our jobs to get fighter planes to escort B-29s over Japan. And that was our sole purpose for going to Iwo was to support B-29s. They were losing a lot of B-29s to Japanese aircraft at that time. And I'm sure that's why they decided to take Iwo Jima, because fighter aircraft was so far away from there. But Iwo was only 500 miles and had the fuel to escort the B-29s up and back. Saved a lot of guys' lives. And of course we furnished all the oxygen. My section did, made it and furnished it. And then we had all kinds of mechanics that did aircraft work and that kind of thing. That was in February of 1945, and we were on Iwo about 2 or 3 months after the invasion was over. Now, I did go to Japan for a few days after the war ended, after the surrender terms were signed. I think it was about 6 days. We flew in and I went along. It was just a ride. I wasn't going on duty, but to haul some things up there. And we landed at Tsugi Air Base in Yokohama, Japan. And on the way up, the pilot flew us right over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we got a good look at it. And still smoldering in some spots, and it was a pathetic sight. Those people went through hell. We were also helping with Okinawa and air power. So some of the aircraft from Iwo did escort duty again into Okinawa. And they called that the Western Pacific. So that was the 3 campaigns. I wasn't a Guard member until after World War II. I think I got my commission, my reserve commission, before I came in the Guard. Before I joined the Guard, I had a good friend or two that had been in the Guard here after the war when they formed the unit. And I talked to them about the Guard, and they said, well, yeah, in fact, one of them he was the battalion commander. He said, if you'll come in, well, you can bring your second lieutenant commission, and you can enlist as a volunteer as a second lieutenant, which I did. You just already had the commission, and when they started the Guard up again, I joined then here. I was, I believe, I was the mortar officer for the 804th Battalion, Guard Battalion. The headquarters was here in Tucumcari, and I was on the battalion staff as a mortar officer. We had some good units that could shoot, and they shot well. Of course, we had vehicles, as well as the weapons we had were mounted on tanks, and they were twin 40 millimeters. I don't know if you've ever seen one. They're probably older than you are, but those were regular tanks, and you had a gun crew that rode up in the turret, and you tactically formed a defense of a certain area, say an airfield, and you figured out directions of attack, how low they could come in, the aircraft, and set your defense up according to avenues of approach from enemy aircraft. And then you had crews that trained in each one of those batteries on their own, had a captain commander, and we furnished any instruction that we could from headquarters with people who had experience on 40 millimeters. And during that time, we went to school. Everyone went to the Air Defense School at Fort Bliss, and in order to be qualified for promotions and just good information you needed to know. As the Assistant Adjutant General, I just pretty much at the direction of the Adjutant General, what he had going and couldn't handle, I'd take care of for him, and visit units, be sure that their equipment was maintained, it was ready to operate in case they were activated, things like that. And we missed the Korean War totally. It just didn't activate us. We expected to be activated any day during the Korean War. Never happened. Vietnam soldiers or government had very few aircraft, if any, and so there just wasn't a place for us, or we would have gone. Governor King told General Miles, support the state police. They'll direct, and you and your troops help them. That's pretty much the way it went. Actually, to go in and did a lot of making sure there were no weapons around, and I'm not talking about guns, I'm talking about clubs, knives, anything they had, and to try to keep the ones that were there hemmed in to where they couldn't do any more damage, and set fire to things like they were doing, and even in some cases killing each other. And I don't think there was a lot of that, but there was some of it. But it was just to make peace with those prisoners and keep them corralled until they could be held with no danger of them getting away. There's some things there that, one or two things I remember that was as bad as seeing people die over there in Iwo. The state police appreciated the heck out of us being out there to support them, because they're kind of few in number. It takes them a while to get all their people in from around the state that are not right there when something like that happens. Now, state emergencies, while I was in the Adjutant General's office, General Miles just told me, he said, you take care of the emergencies as far as lost people up in the mountains there, and hunting or fishing and that kind of thing. And so I did, and at that time we got 2 or 3 helicopters for the Army Guard, and we used them. Had a couple of pilots, Andy Wells, who I guess still lives in Santa Fe, good pilot. All of them were Vietnam veterans, and helicopters, good boys. And they helped a lot around the state too with those helicopters. We fed cows in the wintertime a couple of times, and it's so snowy that the ranchers couldn't get to them. We had people lost, like kids up on this mountain or something, and people couldn't get up there to get them, and they'd call out a few members of the guard. You primarily do what the adjutant general wants you to do, day to day. If he had more things on the fire than he was handling, I'd get them. And whatever it happened to be, if he was tied up, I took his place. Whatever happened, whatever needed to be taken care of, I did it. Just supporting the governor and the adjutant general, that was about it. I don't think there was anything significant other than that prison riot while I was right there in Santa Fe. And that's kind of like Iwo Jima. You won't ever forget it. I bought a farm and started farming after the war. I did like farming, so I farmed and stayed in the Guard. But I liked the military. That's from the time I was a kid. Then I went to work full time for the Guard. And at that time, the top technician could also be the battalion commander. And so I took the job on that basis. And I was a battalion commander for 2 or 3 years before General Miles became the AG, and General King, or Governor King, told him he wanted him to give me the job of assistant adjutant general. I was single during all those years, and I was married but divorced. And so I came back home and met Glenda, and we got married. And I've spent the last 15 or 16 years the best of my life. I would just like to say to the AG and the people in the Guard, don't give up the ship. The Guard's a good thing and it's needed. We have a great country if we just don't lose it.